My grandma grew up being ashamed of being Métis and said that she was called a Métis. She was always ashamed of it, and I feel like when she married my grandpa, I think she felt she'd married up in the world.
Canada is a melting pot of various cultures and languages, which expand beyond English and French. Millions of people all calling Canada home. One such group are the Métis, whose roots in Canada date back in history to the early 1600s and the area once known as Rupert's Land. The Métis played an important role in Canadian history, working as freight runners and guides for the Northwest Mounted Police, surveyors, and the Boundary Commission, as the fur trade moved west along various routes, including the Battleford Trail from Swift Current to Battleford. The Métis traced their ancestry to the First Nations and European settlers, where First Nations women in Canada and the U.S. married fur traders from Scotland, France, and England. Through these mixed marriages, their children became the Métis we know today, which comprise approximately 450,000 of Canada's population. Today, Métis live across Canada. However, the Métis started out in eastern Canada, moving west through the prairies of Red River, Manitoba, with many later moving on to Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Montana. The Métis culture is steeped in tradition, and one which Barb Parchman is now able to fully appreciate. Parchman is a Métis historian and is employed as a curatorial and operations assistant at the Art Gallery of Swift Current. She says the investigation into her family history came full circle through a project she was working on with the local museum.
2010 was Year of the Métis. There hadn't been a lot of history recorded on the Métis in this area. And because of my family history and my interest in history and my skills as a writer, I was asked to take on this project. And so I found it very interesting. We never learned any of this in school. And even though this is our history, the history of this province, the Métis wouldn't have been seen in such a good light in some of the history books. So I learned a whole other angle of history, and I would say this is the real history of Saskatchewan that we weren't taught in school.
Barb's family roots date back to the late 1600s. Following the buffalo from Manitoba to Willowbunch, her great-great-grandmother, Rose McGillis, married Jean-Baptiste Trottier in St. Francois Xavier in Manitoba in 1865. They moved to various locations on the prairies after leaving Red River. They would eventually settle at Lac Pelletier, formerly known as Lac La Plume, where they hunted buffalo, fished, gathered berries off the land, and raised a family. In 1877, Barb's great-grandmother Ursula was born, and through her childhood helped her father in the freighting industry, which included hauling goods with Red River carts along the historic Battleford Trail.
There's a handwritten story that my mom got from one of my aunts about Ursula driving a Red River cart when she was 12 years old from Havre, Montana to Battleford, Saskatchewan. So when great-grandma Ursula was 12, her father asked her to drive a Red River cart. In this handwritten story, it says that she was terrified of the river hills. Driving this cart, they would wrap the wheels with shaganappy, which is buffalo hide, to slow them down. Even though they did that, she would cry all the way and keep her eyes shut until the bottom. When she got to Battleford, she earned $2 and bought herself a pair of shiny rubber boots.
Ursula would keep busy hauling freight with the Red River carts for several years, as her father owned upwards of 500 carts, hauling goods from the Red River Trail going west, and also up from Montana through Swift Current to North Battleford. The Métis also played an integral role with the Northwest Mounted Police during that time, helping to navigate the terrain and assist with language barriers.
The Métis would have guided the Northwest Mounted Police along the trail and would have worked as scouts and interpreters for them. And as the Métis migrated further west from Manitoba, they would have come to Willow Bunch, and then they would have gone farther out on the trails looking for buffalo. Patrice Trottier would have been Ursula, my great-grandmother's brother, and he was one of the last people to participate in a buffalo hunt in this area as they were dying out in the late 1800s.
Barb's great-grandmother Ursula would eventually meet and marry her husband Leo Paronto in 1897. The couple would later settle in the Lac Peltier area, raising numerous children. The Métis were a tight-knit community, following their cultural traditions and religious beliefs, which blended Catholicism and ancient rituals.
In the early 1900s, there was a Father Parchman who was a Catholic priest who ministered, and apparently he wintered out here for a couple years and actually lived in a cave. They called it the grotto, but it was apparently actually more of a cave. And people would gather there for church services as well. They actually mixed their religions. While they would practice the Catholic faith, I know that they also attended the sun dances at the Rocky Boy Reservation in Montana. Sometimes they might go to Catholic church in the morning and go to a Sundance ritual in the afternoon, and they didn't think twice about it. It was just part of their culture and their way.
Building a sense of community continued for the Métis for many years at Lac Peltier, before Barb's great-grandmother Ursula and her family moved south to Montana in the early 1920s.
The Métis in the valley had heard that they would be recognized as Indians if they moved back to the U.S. They got no recognition in Canada for their status, and so many of them moved back to the U.S. then, because they could claim Chippewa and Cree as their heritage. They were originally part of the Pembina Tribal Council, but it dissolved years later, but they can trace their history back to that.
Stories and mementos from Barb Parchman's family history, which she now cherishes, including this Métis Bible, her great-grandmother's ring, and these tanning tools.
My great-grandmother Ursula had some buffalo skinning tools, and I hadn't seen them for many years, and I was so excited when my mom's cousin sent them to me. And some of it's made with old wood, but there's also metal components too, and there's a piece that's welded as well. So obviously some of it's been modified over the years. Rose McGillis was probably born in the early 1800s, and so I suspect that they're well over 200 years old.
Parchman adds that growing up, she didn't know much of her Métis culture, which was evident when she'd come in contact with other family members.
My earliest memories are probably of great-grandma and great-grandpa Paronto. We would go visit them in Montana. What struck me about that was we'd go and visit them and they would talk to us, and I never understood what they were saying. And it's because they were talking in either Cree or Michif. Because I was about 5 or 6 years old at the time, I didn't realize, what the language was, or I just knew that I was related to these people, but I couldn't understand a word they were saying. I didn't know a lot about it until the early 70s when there was some Métis locals formed in Saskatchewan, and Swift Current got a Métis local. It was quite an active organization in that they offered classes in beading and sewing and leather work, and then there would be gatherings where the families in the organization would get together, and there was always music and dance and food involved.
Dance, dance wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, and she lead you on wherever you may be.
And And that's when I realized that all these traditions were part of the Métis culture.
And through her historical project with the Swift Current Museum in 2010, learning of her family's connection to the fur trade and the Hudson Bay Company, Barb finally realized her long-time dream of having a real Red River cart at the Battleford Trail Historic Site. This came to light through the organization of a Métis culture camp at the Battleford Trail Ruts Historic Site in Swift Current in 2017.
My name is Barb Parchman. I'm the curatorial and operations assistant at the Art Gallery Swift Current, and I'm also a Métis woman.
One of the reasons I wanted to put on a Métis culture camp was personal, to celebrate my own history and culture, as well as to learn more about it, because I'm still learning about that history and culture myself. But also, because it's Canada's 150th, I wanted people to recognize the fact that there's been history here for many years. So with everyone celebrating Canada's 150th, I kind of wanted to bring attention to the fact that there was history here before then. I've attended some events on truth and reconciliation in the last couple of years, and been hearing lots of talk about recognizing and honoring First Nations and Métis history and culture. Hugh Henry was doing a trek on the Battleford Trail this summer, and him and I were talking, and he said that it would be so neat to have a Red River cart travel on the trail with him. So it was good, just seemed to be good timing this year to have the cart commissioned, have it go on part of the trek with Hugh, and eventually I will have a secure building with interpretive panels in it where I will house the cart on that site, and so people can see what that trail was about and the Métis history and culture and connection with it.
Having the Red River cart at the historic site was realized through extensive background work, keeping in line with the Métis tradition of construction.
I had two carts commissioned actually for the project, a full-size cart and a half-size cart. The full-size cart was made by Armand Jerome of Jerome Cartworks in Oakbank, Manitoba. The cart that I had made is made with wood from the Red River, where the Métis originally came from. The hubs are made of ash, and the other parts are made of Red River oak. The half-size cart I had built by George Fayant in Regina. George is a Métis cart builder as well, and has been building them for about 20 years as well. He makes demonstration models. His aren't drivable, but I wanted to have something that I could take into schools and to workshops and organizations. And having George build a cart, because George is in Regina, he's handy to bring down to help deliver those workshops.
In addition to the importance of the Red River cart is the social aspect of Métis culture, which includes music and dance.
Métis jigs and reels and some square dancing. In my own family history, it says that my great-grandpa Leo was one of the most popular square dance callers in the district. The dances would have been a combination of when they round dance, and it would have been a combination of that step as well as jigs and reels that like the Scottish people would have done. And so the Métis combined both those and kind of made them their own.
Barb Parchman is proud of her Métis culture and her family's connection to Southwest Saskatchewan. And as she digs deeper into her past, learning more about her roots, she hopes others will embrace the Métis heritage and its important role in Canadian history.
Well, I hope that in 50 years, people in Southwest Saskatchewan and beyond will recognize the Métis contribution to the history of this area. People will be more exposed to Métis culture and heritage, and that it just becomes a part of the Saskatchewan curriculum, and it becomes a part of everyday life, that the Métis have been here all along and that they are part of this history in this province.